Does it have shape? Look at that. Does that block have a space? Mass? That's the volume. Yes, but the molecule. So the gas always goes in whatever direction it wants.
Hello, everybody, and a big namaste from me, Preeti Vikram, founder of Tapas School. It gives me great pleasure to be here at the last session of Tapas Project Shaala. Of course, there's a little bit of sadness also that the conference is coming to an end, but this has been a wonderful 3 days experiencing and learning so much from the fantastic experts that we had at Tapas Project Shaala. Today, I will intend to walk you through some ideas, some thoughts, and strategies of how we can ensure that we are developing thinking in children. And one of the most important ways to do that is to ask the right questions. So, my session today is going to be about asking the big questions for young minds and making sure that we are developing thinking and critical thinking, higher order thinking in children. First, we'll talk about questions, and then maybe towards the end of the session, I'd like to recap all the things that we have learned over the last 3 days of the conference. So, without further waiting, let's get into the questions. So, there are a lot of parents who come up to me. I've spoken to parents over the last 18, 20 years who are always stumped at, whenever I ask my child after school, when they come back home, what did you do at school today? Mostly the answer is, I played nothing, or I don't know. So children answer in a way where the parents feel like, oh my God, why am I sending this child to school if they're not learning anything? So I think that there is a flaw in the question there. Also, predominantly, most of the questions that happen within the school that teachers ask, they're all driven towards testing of memory of the child. It's really about, has the child picked up those words, remembers those words, and the ideas that were discussed. So, again, I think that is because of the way our system of education is. We are trained to ask questions like the way they appear in our assessments, in the summative assessments, like a final exam, a board exam, etc., where the memory of the child is being tested. And which is why most of us are, very comfortable asking these questions that will limit to the testing of the child's memory and not more than that. So let's look at how can we develop questions. Before we talk about it, I wanted to put this up for you. Now, if you can see this, at a conventional school, you will have the teacher probably asking a question like, name the three longest rivers of India. Now, there is nothing wrong with that question, right? She asked, what, name the three longest rivers of India, and the children probably answer that it is Ganga, Godavari, and Krishna. They are the longest rivers. And that's where the thinking ends. And this is an example of how we are testing the rote based learning, how we are testing the memory. But at Tapas, what we do is the question is rephrased in order to get them to think a little bit more. So the question here that we have put up is, what could have been the reason that caused Ganga, Godavari, and Krishna to be the longest rivers of India? Now that is a total game changer. Because when we, you know, turn a question on its head and make it something where the children cannot give the answer in one word or just give a very straightforward answer, it allows the child to build theories in the mind, build certain hypotheses, which they will either prove or disprove, right? So asking the right questions can elicit a lot more than just answers, because it will elicit thinking, and that's what we are here in the business of education, right? Now, when we look at thinking, mm, we have to understand that it starts with a basic concept. There is a hypothesis, right? Every thought has, every concept will have a basic thought upon which knowledge is constructed. Every child will get information from different sources around them, different stimulus around them, and they construct the knowledge about that particular concept. So when we look at the questioning, and this is an example of one of the projects at Tapas. So here we have two boys totally engaged in what they have built. Now, this was the hybrid car project. The conversation was that, one day the children were late coming to school, and then during circle time discussion, we looked at what could be some possible reasons why children came late. And then, the obvious answer to everything in Bangalore is that there was a lot of traffic. So children, then the conversation was, what causes traffic? So children said, yeah, there are a lot of cars, and so what happens when there are a lot of cars? What other problems are caused when there are a lot of cars? Learners then mentioned that, of course, there is the problem of traffic, but there is also the problem of pollution that happens, right? So a lot of conversation happened about cars in general. And then we saw that the learners were very interested in a concept like this. So building on their interest, taking a cue from what they wanted to discuss, we designed a question which was, how can we build a more efficient car? And this particular question became the basis of our entire 2 month long project, during which children looked at how they could build cars which used alternative fuels. And so they had to understand the basics of what it takes to build a car. So this question, first of all, had to be broken down into understanding what the actual problem was. Like, do we know enough about cars to be building a more efficient car, right? So we learned about cars. We looked at what the car, looked like, and from the exterior, and then we had our driver give a lesson on what the car looks like in the interior. So we looked at different ways in which children could get a better understanding of a car. We had an automobile engineering giving a masterclass. We had children talking to a lot of experts in the field of designing and building a car. So the question's first part of it became clear as to what makes a car. Then the question then went on into the children looking at what are the alternative sources of energy, what are the alternative materials that can be used to build a car. So they started experimenting around all these things. Finally, they all built their own versions of an efficient car and presented this model to all the adults in the school. So, this was an important question for us to frame and then ask the children, because one simple question led to so many further thoughts and ideas. And from that one simple question, we touched upon things like force and energy and push and pull and gravity. And, we had your kinetic energy and what causes movement. So we spoke about magnetism, we spoke about friction. So it led itself to a lot of conversations. It lent itself to a lot of very, very interesting conversations. So I just wanted to show this to you to illustrate what a good question can do in your classroom. Right? So, how do we ask good questions? Here's another example I wanted to bring to you. Right? So, this is shared by one of my dear friend and mentor, Jayanti Tambe. So I'm borrowing this from her to be, because I love this story. So this happened in a classroom where one of the children, when they were talking about, when they were reading a book about birds and they were looking through that book, they came across the fact about an ostrich, that the ostrich is the tallest bird. Now, this child had this question that if the ostrich is the tallest bird, how is it that when an ostrich lays an egg, it does not break? Now, in a typical classroom, if this question is asked, what would be the answer? The facilitator will immediately go, the teacher will go about explaining what happens because of which the egg does not break. But in this particular situation, the teacher asked the question back, why do you think it does not break? Why do you think it does not break? So, asking this question led to a bit of exploration. So, what happened in this particular classroom is a life sized ostrich was stuck on the wall, and then there were water balloons filled with water. Children used a step stool to go up to this level from where possibly the ostrich will lay an egg, and they started dropping the water balloons. And as the water balloons fell to the floor, they broke. So it was obvious that, yeah, at this stage it's too high, it's still breaking, I'm going to go low and low and low. So as the children had started experimenting with at which stage the water balloon does not break, suddenly, one of the children in the classroom exclaimed and she said, you know what? The ostrich lays an egg sitting down. And that was such an aha moment. Now, because the teacher asked the question, what do you think happens? Why do you think the egg does not break? It led to a whole lot of exploration around this one concept. So that's again to illustrate the power of asking good questions. Now, I'll be taking you through two models of questioning, which are pretty similar. The first one is the Socratic questioning model, right? So there are 5 steps or 5 ways of which Socratic questioning progresses. The first one is to get the child to clarify their thinking or explain the origin of their idea. For example, it would be, why do you say that? Or what do you mean by that? So this is not just about, the child answering your question. It's also about justifying or clarifying their thinking. The next step would be to challenge the child's premise or assumptions, which is that always the case? Do you think it can be in any other way? Do you think it happens in any other way? Is that always the case? Right? And then you look at the third one, which is ask the child for evidence. Can you think of an example of this? Or is there a reason for us to doubt that evidence? So when you get children to clarify, then you challenge whatever they are saying, and then you ask them for evidence of their thinking. This is all leading to metacognition as well, right? If you really look at it closely, you make children think about their own thinking, their own thought process, right? The next stage in Socratic questioning is you get them to consider an alternative viewpoint. What might someone say to counter that? Or is there another way of looking at it? Right? And I'm going to give you examples of each of this as we move forward. And finally, it's to assess the question. It's to assess the question itself. Why is this an important question? And these questions do not have to be in this linear format that it has to go from 1 to 2 to 3, 4, 5. It can be asked at different stages whenever you're having a conversation with the children. And this is something that parents should practice as well at home, because when you ask good questions, you get great thinking answers, right? So, an example of the Socratic questioning, before we move into the example, I just need to tell you this story that we did in the school called Mancha Mancha Mancha. It is a lovely book for children to read. Very quickly telling you what happens in this story. There is a farmer, and then he decides that he wants to plant a vegetable garden in his home. So he does a lot of digging and sowing and tending to the garden, etc. He's very excited because it's time for harvesting his vegetables. When he goes to the vegetable patch, he sees that there are three bunnies who have raided his vegetable patch and eaten the vegetables. So then he builds elaborate traps and elaborate ways and mechanisms of keeping these rabbits out of that particular vegetable patch. In the end, they still manage to sneak in, and so the farmer decides that, you know what, I give up. Let's all enjoy the vegetables together. And so that was the little story that we did in the classroom, which lent itself to science and technology, engineering, art, and math. But using this, when we were questioning the children, right? After they heard this story, then we asked them to about what could have been some of the other ways that the farmer kept the um, rabbits out of his vegetable patch, the bunnies out of his vegetable patch. One of the children gave the answer that there could have been sticky substances which were put on the poles, on the periphery of the vegetable patch, so that the bunnies could get stuck in that sticky substance, and so they will never be able to enter. So this was one of the questions that we asked. Now, using Socratic questioning, we asked further questions to clarify his thoughts. So we said, why do you say that? And Kavish said that bunny's paws could get stuck in the sticky substance. So then we challenged the child's premise and said, is that always the case? So he answered that animals will always get stuck in sticky things. And then we asked for evidence. Can you think of examples of this? Where else have you seen this? So he has answered that we see this with spiders. Spiders catch their food using sticky substances. Now, this kind of questioning helps children to extend their thinking. It also helps with metacognition, like I said earlier, right? Children are able to hypothesize, reflect, predict, question, and do so much more when we have this kind of questioning. And I think this is brilliant because, I don't think personally I would have been able to come up with the answer of, yeah, I've seen spiders do this. So it just shows that children are able to think a lot better than we adults do sometimes. Now, that was the Socratic questioning model. I just want to very quickly also take you through the HOTS framework that has been provided. HOTS stands for Higher Order Thinking Skills, based on Bloom's taxonomy. right? Now, this is something that I wanted to put up. Most of you are probably already familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, where it begins with the first stage being of knowledge, where the children are gaining information about a particular concept. After knowledge is comprehension, third is application, and then we move to um, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, right? So just going to make sure that this is completely visible, and just give me a second, please. Right. So, at each stage of Bloom's taxonomy, it's important to understand what kind of questions can be asked to elicit the answers as per that stage or for that particular stage of the taxonomy. We all know that presently, we maximum in our schools, we are restricting ourselves to the first three stages of Bloom's taxonomy, which is knowledge, comprehension, and a little bit of application, right? So let's look at what could be some questions for these stages. When you look at understanding if the children have the knowledge of a particular concept, you will ask the who, what, when, where, how, describe, what is questions. Some of the verbs that you could think of for this particular stage is define, fill in the blank, list, identify, label, locate, match, etc. So these could be some ways in which questions are asked of children for testing their knowledge. If it's for comprehension, you want to understand if the child has comprehended whatever you've just gone through in the classroom, you will do these kind of questions. Can you retell this in your own words? What are the differences that exist between? So it shows that the child has clearly understood what information was presented to them. If you would like to understand the application of what they have understood, then you need to ask questions of how is this an example of dash, how is this related to dash, so asking the questions which will get them to apply the knowledge that they have, apply the understanding they have of that knowledge, is what the third stage of Bloom's taxonomy is. I think till here we are all very comfortable to up to this stage because our own schooling system has given us the tools to be able to do these three stages. Now the fourth, fifth, and the sixth stage, whereas, are something else altogether. If we want children to develop higher order thinking skills, we should be pushing them into the fourth, fifth, and the sixth stage of Bloom's taxonomy. I'm sorry. So the fourth stage is analysis. Comprehension is one part. Analysis is to be critically able to take the parts apart and be able to magnify them and look at what they really mean, right? So analysis will be what are the parts or features of, classify, outline or diagram, how does this compare and contrast with, what evidence can you present. Are you seeing the similarities between Socratic questioning as well as Bloom's taxonomy? Definitely there will be similarities that you could use in your thinking. Synthesis, now taking apart and then putting it together to be able to make sense of it holistically, to be able to make sense of the concept in a much more deeper way, is synthesis. This is to combine the ideas to form a whole new idea itself, right? It's about what solutions can you suggest, how would you design this, keeping in mind the older one. Say for instance, if we take the example of the project of the building a more efficient car, how would you design a more efficient car? That particular question would come in the synthesis part of the higher order thinking skills. Then look at evaluation, because once you have gone through this entire process of thinking, finally reflection and evaluating our thoughts and opinions are very important. And so you will ask questions such as, do you agree with that? What do you think about this? So helping children to form their own opinions is important, right? They should not be dependent on the teacher's opinion, or textbook said so, or the media said so. If we are able to get children to form their own opinions based on critically evaluating all the facts, then we have done our job as an educator, right? So these are some of the questions, the way we should be forming questions. And this is not easy, because this is something that's great to present in a PPT and put up in your classroom, but to be able to ask these questions on a regular basis in the classroom is quite difficult, in fact. So as a teacher, most easily the questions that come to mind are about the concept that you've just taught. How many colors are there in the rainbow? Or what is the color of the sky? These are questions that come very easily to us. So if we flip it and we say, why do you think the sky is blue, instead of asking what is the color of the sky, I think you will have children responding in a much more brilliant way, in a way that showcases the way that they are thinking. So this is one of the frameworks that I wanted to leave all of you with, because in order to be able to build a child-led learning environment, whether at home or at school, you need to be able to know the right questions to ask in order to direct their thinking in a particular way, right? There are certain learning outcomes they need to go through. They have to achieve at the end of a particular year, and so they need to be guided in that gently through the right questions that you're asking. So that is some of the things that we can do in school as well as at home. I specifically wanted to bring the attention of parents to something like this, where, as families, we ask, how was your school? Like I started off this session with, we don't know to ask the right questions. In fact, I've seen a lot of times when parents are picking up children after school, especially at the early years level, two questions that really bother me is one, which is the most common, most standard one: Dabba kaya? Did you have your lunch or did you have your snack? And this child is filled with information and knowledge and ideas that they've learned through the day. They want to share all that, and suddenly you asked if I've eaten. And so, the child is like, yeah, okay, I've eaten. So, they've lost their track of thought. Or the other question, apart from the snack box, we hear is, have you used the washroom today? So I'm sure that parents are not thinking, I'm sending my child to a school to do these two things, that is, eat and to excrete. So let's figure out a way to ask better questions so that you can understand what happens in your child's day at school. These are also great conversation starters to have at the dinner table, where you're all sitting together as a family to eat, right? So let's look at some examples. What was the best thing about your day at school? What was the hardest thing about your day at school? What was the funniest thing that about your day? And kindest? Did something happen at school today that made you feel proud? Can you tell me about it? What book did your teacher read today? Tell me about that story. You could even ask things like, who was sitting next to you during lunch break and what did they have in their snack box? So we can just, make sure that we are asking better questions. And when you are faced with questions from children, you make sure that you're not giving the answers straight away. Make sure that you are giving enough, rephrase their question to make them think about it themselves. Like, why does it rain, or where does rain come from, is a classic example, right? I mean, the kinds of answers we hear parents have told their children, it's just something of that comes straight out of a fiction book. So when you ask the child, why do you think it happens, or where do you think rain comes from? And I'm sure they have some constructs of knowledge which they will be able to share with everybody. So that's all about questions. I hope you got a bit of an idea of why asking the right questions are important, and how asking the right questions can ensure that critical thinking is developed in children. So I think I have spent about 30 minutes talking about questions, and I'd like to take a few minutes about talking a little bit about why this conference was organized. Um, Tapas's tagline is Tejasvi Navaditamastu. which talks about let the learner and the teacher both be illuminated by what we have learned. So, this particular line means that it is our responsibility to ensure that we are spreading this information, spreading the knowledge that we are getting through our process of running a project based learning school. So, in that context, the Project Shaala was organized. This particular virtual conference called Tapas Project Shaala is a way of us giving back to the society, ensuring that we are all learning together. And when we all learn together, I'm sure that education overall is benefited. Children overall are benefited, right? Very quickly, I want to go over all the sessions we've had starting from Friday evening right up to now, and we look at maybe two or three takeaways that we've had from each session. And I'm extremely thankful. I'm very grateful because I got to attend each of these sessions separately, right? And I have attended these sessions and had a lot of learning that has come from these sessions. From the first session, we started with the Bharatiya Shiksha model presented by Munir Dhimanji from Vidyakshetra. From that session, he spoke about the Panchakosha Vikasa, how every human being is divided into different layers, and how it's critical that we address development of all the layers, only then education is holistic. He also spoke about the wisdom found in the Indian knowledge systems, and how we should be using all of that for education in today's day and age, right? Then we had a session by Dr. Anju Chazot. She is from Mahatma Gandhi International School, Ahmedabad. One of the striking things that she mentioned, which a lot of people have resonated with and have spoken about to me after her session, was she compared the present education system to two things. One is the factory system, and second is the prison system. And she spoke about all the things in our present education system that we have borrowed from the prison system. And I think that was a huge wake up call for me, particularly from Dr. Anju's session. It was also, she also spoke about energy and how we're all made up of energy finally, and that energy is something that permeates every learning that happens. So we have to be aware of our energies that we bring into the school as well, and how the energies at school are translated into learning. I think these were two brilliant ideas that I took away from Anju ma'am's session. Then we have John Lama. He is the author of the high quality project based learning, the gold standards of project based learning. So John Lama has authored a lot of books about how project based learning benefits a student and the teacher together. I think his session was really about understanding, asking the right questions, guiding the children's thinking, and then moving into how we assess this entire process. So he really gave a framework on what project based learning could look like, and that is very valuable for a school like Tapas. We started day two, that is 11th February, with Dr. Gina's session on social emotional learning, and especially in project based learning, what that looks like. So I think she gave us wonderful frameworks, but one thing that I did take away was that we cannot assume that social emotional learning is happening. We have to ensure that we are definitely having a framework and keeping time aside for social emotional learning. So I think we had a great session from Dr. Gina. A lot of resources have been shared by her, and whoever has registered for this conference will be receiving emails with the links to the resources and the free book that she had shared. So please watch out for that. Then we had an interesting panel discussion from parents, right? And there were three sets of parents that we had, and all three of them were at different stages in their parenting journey. But all three of them, I think, very strongly spoke about giving autonomy to children and making sure that they are raised as independent thinkers. And that was the biggest takeaway from the parenting session, right? We did have the session from Dr. Vikas Shinde, who, though he was on the way to meet his mother who was unwell, made sure that he parked the car and did the session from the car. So we're very thankful for that, Dr. Vikas. He is the director for the Center for Excellence of PBL at Vishwaniketan University. So he spoke about the NEP 2020, and in order to implement NEP 2020, especially in the higher educational institutions, why the PBL framework was the best suited approach. So I think we are very grateful that somebody from higher education believes in project based learning as much as we do. So thank you for that. Finally, no, not finally. This is 11th Feb evening. Oh my God, we've done quite a lot of things in the last 3 days. We had on 11th Feb a very long session from Dr. Stephen Levy. Mr. Levy has been a fourth grade teacher and then a practitioner, and he gave a lot of insights, examples of how project based learning could be implemented. And any teacher or parent watching it would have had a lot of takeaways in terms of just the basic ideas like, oh, I can do this, I can connect this learning to this particular learning outcome. This project to this learning outcome. So I think this was a very interesting session, and I personally had a lot of takeaways. I was furiously making notes during Mr. Levy's session. We were then very fortunate to have the panel discussion regarding our Jaga project. The first panel was last evening, which is on 11th February. This panel discussion gave us insights about what it takes to design a particular campus. The takeaway was that children's voice have to be very strongly advocated, and we need to ensure that it is part of the campus design. We also got ideas on how we can make sure that the children's ideas are translated into the design of the campus. Then we came to the session by Mr. Greg Green about flipped classrooms. Now, flipped classrooms, apologies. Flipped classrooms is something that he implemented in a school at US, which was in a marginalized community, and he ensured that these children were able to learn and perform better through flipped classroom. He was able to make sure that the results of the outcomes of that particular school were, from a very, you know not so great place, it moved to something which has become excellent. And that is a model that he helped us replicate. He has helped replicate many times over in many countries. So that was Mr. Greg Green. Finally, we had the session today, which was a panel discussion on how do we ensure that children's voices are continued to be heard, and some fantastic points came out in the session just before this. All our eminent panelists were able to give us ideas, thoughts, and ways in which we can keep children's voice going. In fact, there were some great management lessons, leadership lessons, ideas for startups, etc., that came out from this. So I would highly recommend that you watch this. And I think finally we did learn about questions in this session of mine. So that kind of brings me to the end of the entire conference. And I'm very thankful for have had this opportunity where we were able to bring this learning to all of you. And we hope that these conversations have ignited something within you that will help transform education, whether as a parent who is going to go out there and question their child's school, or as an educator who's going to drive the change in their school. I think it's important that these conversations do not stop here, and these have to be something that are taken forward as we go. So I'm very, very thankful for having this opportunity, right? And we hope that we continue these engagements going forward as well. We have received great feedback, and Mr. Ravi Limaye, I think, has attended a lot of our sessions. I see that he's attending this one as well. I'm grateful for your following, sir. Um, All right, then I'm going to let you go on your Sunday afternoon. Have a great weekend, whatever is left of it, and hope to see you and engage with you further in this journey of education. So, thank you all and have a great weekend.